Shedeur Sanders is one of the most confusing prospects in this draft because on one hand, he's probably the most talked about player in this class, but at the same time, he's also the one that receives the most hate. And if you've been keeping up with Colorado and Shedeur over the past couple of years, then you probably know why that's the case. And if not, then that is something we will get into later. Anyways, that's not the main point I want to talk about. The thing I want to focus on is Shedeur as a prospect. You see, I think it's gotten to a point where people have such a strong disliking towards him that it started to affect how they see him as a player. Because it's one thing to not like Shedeur, but if that's your main reason for saying he won't succeed in the NFL or isn't worth the first or second round pick, then you're just hating. But anyways, let's get into the breakdown and I'll tell you why I believe Shedeur Sanders is overhated. Now, with all the attention, noise, and with his dad being NFL legend Deion Sanders, who was also his head coach, you'd assume that he must be some flashy player. But that just isn't the case, which I feel does play a small part in why some people are lower on him than others, because people are going in thinking to see some flashy player like Jaden Daniels or Lamar Jackson when they watch him play. But he just isn't that type of player. In fact, he plays more like a traditional pocket passer than anything else. And when he's kept clean in the pocket, he can absolutely pick apart the defense. The only problem with that is in his 2 years at Colorado, he faced pressure constantly. I mean, just this past season alone, he led the nation with 204 pressures on his dropbacks, which was 36.2% of his dropbacks. And what if I told you that was actually better than the previous season where he was pressured on 37% of his dropbacks? Now, 37% might not sound that high, but just for a comparison, in this year's Super Bowl where Mahomes got absolutely obliterated by that Eagles front, in that game, Mahomes faced pressure on 38.1% of his dropbacks. So yeah, Shedeur definitely dealt with a lot of pressure in college. Even with facing so much pressure, he was still able to stay composed and produced at a consistent level, while also rarely turning the ball over, which I view as one of his biggest strengths. You see, a criticism that many quarterbacks face going into the NFL draft is they played behind an elite offensive line, or they didn't face much pressure in college, so how will they be when they're behind a bad offensive line starting off? But with Shedeur, we've seen him play behind a bad offensive line and still produce, so there's not as many question marks in that area. On top of that, he has elite accuracy on the short and intermediate levels of the field, which shows on the stat sheet as he had an FBS leading 74% completion percentage this past season and the highest career completion percentage in FBS history at 71.8%. Key reasons for that are due to Shedeur's willingness to let routes develop, his ability to progress through reads, and the fact that he constantly throws people open due to his understanding of defensive leverages and great ball placement, which is another thing that I'm high on him about, because many quarterbacks at the collegiate level throw to receivers that are open instead of throwing them open, if that makes sense. On top of that, he throws a very receiver-friendly ball, and that is something I feel is not talked about enough when looking at quarterbacks in general. You see, Shedeur not only has touch on his passes, but he also throws balls that keep his receivers out of harm's way, which is a problem that even quarterbacks in the NFL have. So if you're able to throw balls that give your receiver a higher chance of catching it and making sure to protect them in the open field with how you lead them and place the balls, then yeah, that's something I see as a positive. Shedeur has also shown that he has that clutch factor, as he showed up big for Colorado late in games or in clutch situations. Now, all that does sound good, but I do have some concerns with Shedeur's game. The main concerns of mine is how long he holds onto the ball and how he deals with pressure. You see, he did face a lot of pressure behind that Colorado offensive line, but not all the blame is on them for the amount of sacks he took, because for whatever reason, Shedeur hardly ever threw the ball away when under duress, which led to him getting sacked on multiple occasions. Although he didn't turn the ball over, he still caused his team to play from behind the sticks way too often, which is never a recipe for success. Many people have speculated his unwillingness to throw the ball away is simply due to him not wanting to lower his completion percentage. And honestly, I could see why people would say that, because when watching him, there would be plays where he had an opportunity to throw the ball away, but he just held onto it and either took a sack or ran out of bounds for a loss. And plays like that are drive killers. Now, that may not be the reason as to why he does that, but regardless, that's something he's going to have to change in the NFL. Shedeur also has a tendency to drift backwards, which can cause edge rushers to have an easier path to him. He also has the same habit when faced with pressure. Instead of climbing the pocket or turning it upfield, he'll back up, which can cause him to throw off platform and impact his throwing power. He can sometimes be too overconfident in his arm talent as well, which leads to him making risky throws that could be turnovers at the next level, especially with his deep ball passes and tight window throws. In addition to that, he doesn't exactly have the strongest arm overall, but he's not a gunslinger quarterback, so it's not something I'm too worried about. But nonetheless, it's still something to make note of. Shedeur tends to struggle with top-tier defenses and schemes, mainly when they give him advanced blitz packages, and that can't happen at the next level. As a quarterback, you gotta be able to pick up and identify different looks because that can affect the outcome of the play. That's just something he's going to have to work on though. After all, the defensive looks will only become more complicated in the NFL. Lastly, there's the whole problem with his ego or personality, which seems to be one of the top concerns overall with him and one of the biggest reasons as to why he receives so much hate. And I could understand why people have this concern with him, whether it's his confidence, which can come off as arrogance, or the comments he's made publicly criticizing his offensive line and even a former teammate that transferred. Not to mention that coach that said he came off as brash and arrogant at the NFL Combine, which was backed up by 2 other teams stating that he seemed like he didn't care what they thought about him during the interviewing process in a way that wasn't professional. All of this, combined with how much media attention he gets, especially on these topics, is going to lead to people not being too fond of him and more negative comments. And all of it just snowballs into something bigger. Now look, I get it. I see why people have this problem with Shedeur. A lot of this is not a good look on him and has caused me, like many others, to be turned off by him. In fact, at times, I found myself being overly critical about him because of things like this. But I do think a lot of this is blown out of proportion. Shedeur is a confident guy and brutally honest about how he feels, and it can come off as arrogant to some. A lot of times, he's just speaking his mind, which leads to him saying things that most people wouldn't, or things he probably shouldn't say. Also, the media doesn't help with this either. Honestly, some of these narratives are pushed by them. If you've kept up with college football the past 2 years, then you know just how much the Colorado football team led by head coach Shedeur Sanders was talked about. It honestly felt like at times they were the only team getting any coverage. But anyways, this led to Shedeur constantly being in the spotlight, so whatever he said was going to be talked about. So when you're already constantly seeing him in Colorado being talked about everywhere, as soon as you see him say something you don't like or agree with, it's just going to make you like him even less or become even more annoyed with seeing him. Also, when it comes to the comments about him during the Combine, I really don't know how much of that to believe. When it's draft season, there's a lot of conflicting reports and smoke put out there. And sometimes it's in hopes that a player falls lower in the draft so that a team won't have to trade up or give up as much to go and get him. Just think back to 2 years ago when there were reports saying that CJ Stroud was uncoachable, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, he's been talked about by his coaches in the NFL as very coachable. Now looking back on that, it's possible that it was just smoke from other teams hoping he would fall to them. I say all that to say, be wary and don't believe every report you see in the draft process. Now I'm not saying all of this is not something to be concerned with. I do think teams should make a note of it, but I don't agree with all the hate due to this. Like I said, he's a confident guy, but he can say and do things that a lot of people won't agree with. But as long as it's not affecting the team and his teammates respect him along with his coaches, then I don't see it as that big of an issue. Not to mention that Shedeur is definitely a troll. He clearly says and does things to get opposing fans and players worked up. He for sure knows what he's doing when he does some of these things, which I don't think gets talked about enough. So overall, I do think Shedeur Sanders is a confusing prospect. He does have some things he needs to work on, but I do think he has what it takes to see success at the next level as a pocket passer. That's also hoping he gets drafted into the right situation, but you could really say that about any player. My dream fit for him is the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think they're kind of at a point where they need to stop taking one-year rentals at the quarterback position if they want to get out of this 9-8 or 10-7 territory. He may need a year or so to develop or to sit behind a veteran, but I feel Shedeur Sanders can be that guy for them. Not to mention that the Steelers have no problem taking guys with personality concerns. But with all that being said, let me know what you think of Shedeur Sanders and how you think he will do in the NFL down in the comments below. And if you did enjoy the video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more. Trust me, I do really appreciate it. So you may not agree with what I have to say, but in my eyes, Shedeur Sanders is overhated.